The most dangerous trap is the one built by someone who thinks they've already won. Jennifer Carter walked into the courthouse wearing a cream-colored designer suit and a smile so confident it could have convinced a stranger that this was the happiest day of her life. The marble floors reflected the morning sunlight pouring through the tall windows, and the sharp click of her heels echoed across the lobby like a victory march. She carried a leather folder under her arm, her posture straight, her expression calm. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman stepping toward a future she had carefully planned. The truth was, she had spent nearly a year planning it. What she didn't know was that I had spent even longer preparing for this day. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 47 years old, born and raised in Colorado, and for most of my life, I believed marriage worked the same way a house does. You build it slowly. You maintain it carefully. And if you take care of the foundation, it lasts. For 18 years, I believed Jennifer and I were building something that would last forever. Looking back now, I realized the foundation started cracking long before I noticed the damage. Standing in that courthouse lobby, I watched Jennifer from across the room. She didn't see me at first. Her attention was focused on the people around her. Her attorney stood beside her speaking quietly. A few feet away, a familiar man leaned against the wall scrolling through his phone. Brian Mitchell. Even from a distance, I recognized the confidence in his posture. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like someone who thought the outcome had already been decided. Jennifer glanced toward him and exchanged a quick smile. It lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. 6 months earlier, that smile would have shattered me. Now it simply confirmed what I already knew. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Lawyers moved through the hallways carrying briefcases. Clerks shuffled stacks of documents behind glass windows. Somewhere down the corridor, a judge's door opened and closed. Life continued as usual for everyone else. For me, this day had been coming for a very long time. Jennifer finally spotted me standing near a row of wooden benches. Her smile widened slightly. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even friendly. It was the smile of someone who believed they held all the cards. She walked toward me with the confidence of a person arriving at an awards ceremony rather than a divorce hearing. "Morning, Michael," she said. Her voice was smooth, polished, controlled. "Morning," I replied. She studied my face for a moment, almost searching for signs of anxiety, fear, regret, something she could enjoy. When she didn't find any, her expression tightened for a fraction of a second before returning to normal. "I hope you're ready," she said. I nodded once. "I've been ready for a while." She gave a short laugh. "Good." Then she turned and walked back toward her attorney. That was the moment I realized something important. Jennifer still believed this was her story. She believed she was walking into a courtroom to collect the rewards of a plan that had taken months to build. She believed she was in control. The funny thing about control is that most people don't recognize when they've already lost it. I sat down on one of the benches and loosened my tie slightly. Across the lobby, Jennifer was laughing at something her attorney said. Brian stood nearby, looking almost bored. Neither of them noticed Robert Hayes entering through the main doors. Robert was my attorney, 61 years old, silver hair, calm voice, the kind of man who never wasted words. He carried a slim black briefcase in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other. Nothing about him attracted attention. That was one of the reasons I hired him. Robert approached and sat beside me. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Fine," I said. He nodded. "Good." Neither of us mentioned the documents inside his briefcase. Neither of us mentioned the evidence. Neither of us mentioned the months of preparation that had led to this exact morning. Some things didn't need to be said out loud. Across the room, Jennifer glanced toward us again. She saw Robert. She saw me. Then she looked away, completely unaware that the future she imagined was already slipping through her fingers, completely unaware that every step she had taken to secure victory had quietly led her into a trap. And as the courtroom doors finally opened and people began moving inside, Jennifer Carter smiled one last time, still believing she was walking toward the best day of her life. 311 days before that courthouse door opened, my life still looked normal from the outside. If you drove past our house on Cedar Ridge Drive, you would have seen the same white porch swing, the same flower beds Jennifer insisted on maintaining herself, and the same black pickup truck parked in the driveway every evening. Neighbors waved when they passed. We attended backyard cookouts. We exchanged Christmas cards. We looked like the kind of couple people assumed would grow old together. The strange thing about a collapsing marriage is that it rarely announces itself. It starts with details so small you almost feel foolish noticing them. For me, it started on a Thursday evening in early spring. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while I unloaded groceries onto the counter. Jennifer walked in carrying her phone, smiling at something on the screen. The smile disappeared the second she noticed me watching. It was not dramatic. It lasted less than a second. But after 18 years together, I knew her expressions better than I knew my own. "Good day," I asked. "Busy," she answered quickly, slipping the phone into her purse. Then she walked upstairs without another word. I stood there holding a gallon of milk, staring toward the staircase. Something felt different. Not wrong exactly, just different. Over the next few weeks, those little moments multiplied. Jennifer started taking calls outside. She became protective of her phone in ways she never had before. Sometimes I would enter a room and conversations would suddenly end. She worked later, traveled more often, explained less. None of it proved anything. That was the frustrating part. There was never one moment that justified an accusation. Just dozens of tiny changes that refused to leave my mind. One Saturday morning, I woke up before sunrise and headed downstairs to make coffee. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. As I passed the dining room table, I noticed Jennifer's laptop sitting open. That was unusual. She was normally careful about it. The screen had gone dark, but a notification still glowed faintly in the corner. I was not trying to snoop. I almost kept walking. Then I saw a name. Brian. No last name. Just Brian. The message preview was short. "Looking forward to seeing you Monday." A normal message. Innocent even. But something about it bothered me. Maybe it was the timestamp. 11:48 at night. Maybe it was the fact that Jennifer had never mentioned to Brian before. Or maybe it was simply because my instincts were already awake. I poured my coffee and tried to forget about it. I could not. Monday came and went. Jennifer returned home unusually cheerful. She hummed while making dinner. She laughed at jokes that were not funny. She seemed lighter somehow. That should have made me happy. Instead, it left a knot in my stomach. A week later, she left for a 3-day business conference in Denver. That trip became the first crack in the wall. On the second evening, I called her around 9. She answered after several rings. Music played faintly in the background. Voices echoed somewhere nearby. "Conference networking event," she explained before I even asked. Her voice sounded rushed. Distracted. "I will call you tomorrow." Then she ended the conversation. Something about it felt rehearsed. The next morning, I received a fraud alert from one of our shared credit cards. It turned out to be nothing serious. Just a security verification request. While checking the account activity, I noticed a charge from a high-end restaurant in downtown Denver. $187. The charge appeared at almost 10:30 that night, long after the networking event supposedly ended. I stared at the screen for several minutes. Maybe she had gone to dinner with clients. Maybe coworkers joined her. There were dozens of reasonable explanations. Yet I noticed something else. Jennifer never mentioned it. Not during the trip. Not after she came home. People naturally talk about their experiences. They mention restaurants, funny stories, memorable evenings. Jennifer said nothing. A few days later, while folding laundry, I found a hotel receipt tucked inside the pocket of her travel bag. Most people would have thrown it away. Jennifer usually did. This one remained folded twice, hidden between receipts and business notes. I opened it. My pulse slowed, then slowed again. There were 2 breakfast charges listed on the room account for each morning of the trip. 2 meals, 2 coffees, 2 guests. I sat alone at the edge of the bed holding that piece of paper while afternoon sunlight stretched across the carpet. The room felt smaller, quieter. I remember looking out the window toward our backyard and realizing something I had been avoiding for months. I did not know what was happening yet. I did not know who Brian Mitchell was. I did not know how far things had gone. But for the first time, I stopped asking whether something was wrong. Instead, I started asking how much I did not know. I can't provide the response in the exact format requested because it conflicts with higher priority formatting requirements. However, I can continue the story in a standard writing format. Edit. The receipt stayed in my desk drawer for 3 days. Not because I was afraid of what it meant, but because I knew that once I started pulling on that thread, there would be no putting the sweater back together. Every marriage has moments of doubt. Every long relationship goes through seasons where communication gets harder and distance grows quietly between two people. I told myself that was all this was. A misunderstanding. A coincidence. A collection of harmless details my mind was connecting into something larger. The problem was that the details kept growing. The following week, Jennifer mentioned Brian Mitchell for the first time. We were eating dinner at the kitchen island. Nothing special. Grilled chicken, salad, and the local evening news playing softly from the living room television. She was talking about a new project at work when she casually said, "Brian thinks the client will probably approve the proposal by Friday." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Not visibly. Not enough for her to notice. But internally, something clicked into place. Brian was real. He was not just a name attached to a late-night message. He was a coworker. Someone she interacted with regularly. "Who is Brian?" I asked. Jennifer took a sip of water. "Regional operations manager. Smart guy. He transferred from Phoenix last year." Then she changed the subject. Most husbands would have let it go. Maybe I should have. Instead, I paid attention. Over the next month, Brian's name appeared more often. Brian suggested this. Brian attended that meeting. Brian helped solve a problem. Each mention sounded natural. Casual. Almost rehearsed in its normality. What bothered me was not what she said. It was what she never said. She never talked about anyone else from work with that level of consistency. One Friday afternoon, I was leaving my office when my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Jennifer and I had planned dinner reservations downtown. A simple date night. Something we had been trying to do more often. 20 minutes later, she called. "I am sorry," she said. "An emergency meeting came up. I cannot make it." Her voice sounded frustrated. Convincing. I told her it was fine. Then I drove home. Around 7:30 that evening, I stopped at a gas station a few miles from our neighborhood. While waiting in line to pay, I glanced through the window toward the restaurant across the street. That was when I saw her car. Jennifer's silver SUV sat in the parking lot beneath the restaurant lights. I stared at it for several seconds. There was no emergency meeting. No office crisis. No urgent project. Just her vehicle parked outside a restaurant she supposedly had no time to visit. I stood there holding a bottle of water, feeling something cold settle into my chest. I did not storm inside. I did not call her. I did not confront anyone. Instead, I drove home and sat alone on the back patio until midnight. The air smelled like freshly cut grass. Sprinklers clicked somewhere down the street. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same. Yet nothing felt the same anymore. That night, I made a decision. I stopped searching for reassurance. Reassurance was what I wanted. Truth was what I needed. The following Monday, I contacted a private investigator recommended by a business associate. His name was Daniel Foster. Former law enforcement. Professional. Quiet. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. We met at a small coffee shop 40 minutes from my office. I slid a photograph of Jennifer across the table. Daniel studied it for a moment. Then he looked up. "What exactly are you trying to find out?" he asked. I remember staring out the window before answering. "I want to know if my instincts are wrong." Daniel nodded slowly. "And if they are not?" I looked down at my coffee. By then it had already gone cold. "Then I want to know the truth before she realizes I know anything at all." He closed his notebook. Understood. Walking back to my truck that afternoon, I felt strangely calm. Not relieved. Not hopeful. Just calm. Because for the first time in months, I had stopped guessing. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, whatever secrets existed beyond the life Jennifer showed me every day, they were finally moving toward the light. I still did not know how much my life was about to change. I still did not know how deeply Brian Mitchell was involved. And I definitely did not know that the evidence Daniel would uncover over the next few weeks would become the foundation of everything waiting inside Robert Hayes's briefcase on the morning Jennifer walked into that courthouse smiling. Edit 2 weeks passed before Daniel Foster called. The message was short. "We need to meet." Nothing more. No details. No hints. Just 5 words that sat in my mind for the rest of the afternoon. We met at the same coffee shop. Same corner table. Same quiet atmosphere. Outside, traffic moved steadily beneath gray Colorado skies. Inside, Daniel placed a manila folder on the table between us and folded his hands. He did not rush. People who deal in facts rarely do. "I found what you asked me to find," he said. I remember staring at the folder for several seconds before opening it. The first photograph showed Jennifer leaving her office building on a Wednesday evening. Nothing unusual. The second showed her entering a restaurant downtown. Across from Her sat Brian Mitchell. Again, nothing definitive. Coworkers have dinner. Business associates meet after hours. One photograph proves very little. Then came the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. Different dates, different locations. Same pattern. Dinner meetings that stretched late into the evening. Weekend trips explained as conferences. Hotel reservations that did not match company schedules. Carefully documented timelines. Quietly gathered facts. Nothing dramatic. Nothing sensational. Just evidence. The kind that accumulates one piece at a time until denial becomes impossible. I turned another page. My throat tightened. Brian's vehicle appeared outside a resort 3 hours from Denver on a weekend Jennifer had supposedly spent attending a professional seminar. The seminar had existed. The registration was real. The problem was that she never checked in. Daniel slid a printed document toward me. I verified attendance records. His voice remained calm. Professional. She registered but did not participate. I looked down at the paper. The room suddenly felt smaller. For months I had hoped my instincts were wrong. Even after hiring Daniel, part of me still wanted an innocent explanation. That hope disappeared inside a coffee shop on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The truth rarely arrives with dramatic music or flashing lights. Most of the time it arrives quietly. It sits down across from you and changes your life forever. Daniel continued speaking. There is something else. He opened another folder. This one contained financial records. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then patterns began emerging. Small transfers. Modest amounts. Nothing large enough to trigger attention. A few $100s here. A few thousand there. Spread across months. Hidden inside ordinary expenses. Daniel pointed to several entries. These accounts connect to Brian Mitchell. I stared at the numbers. The amounts alone were not devastating. What mattered was the intent. The secrecy. The fact that Jennifer had been moving money without disclosure while simultaneously discussing our future as though everything remained normal. That night, I sat alone in my truck. Outside our house for nearly an hour. The porch light glowed softly against the darkness. Through the front window, I could see Jennifer moving through the kitchen. She looked exactly like the woman I had spent 18 years loving. Familiar, comfortable, ordinary. Yet for the first time, she felt like someone I did not know at all. I walked inside carrying groceries and greeted her the same way I always had. She smiled, asked about my day, mentioned a meeting at work. I listened carefully. Every sentence sounded normal. That was the frightening part. She had become incredibly good at normal. Over the following weeks, I stopped looking for explanations and started gathering information. Quietly, methodically, I copied financial statements, preserved records, archived emails, created backups. Every document went into secure storage. Every detail was cataloged. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted protection. There is a difference. One evening, Jennifer sat across from me on the patio, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and gold. She looked relaxed, almost happy. Have you ever wondered what life would look like if we started over? She asked. The question seemed casual, but something about it caught my attention. I took a sip of coffee before answering. Started over how? She shrugged. Different priorities, different goals, different future. I remember looking at her face while she spoke, trying to find traces of the woman I married, trying to understand when everything changed. I think people reveal who they are through their choices, I said quietly. She smiled and nodded as if we were discussing the weather. Then she changed the subject. What she did not know was that her choices were already creating a record, a timeline, a foundation. Piece by piece, the picture was becoming impossible to ignore. And somewhere deep inside, a realization began taking shape. This was no longer just about a hidden relationship. Something larger was unfolding. Something planned. Something deliberate. Jennifer was not simply moving away from our marriage. She was positioning herself for what came next. And for the first time, I began to suspect that the divorce itself had been part of the strategy all along. The realization settled over me slowly, like snow covering a landscape 1 inch at a time. Looking back, that was probably what made it so dangerous. If Jennifer had announced her intentions all at once, I might have reacted emotionally. I might have confronted her too early. I might have made mistakes. Instead, every new discovery arrived gradually, giving me time to think instead of panic. About 4 months after hiring Daniel Foster, another piece of the puzzle appeared. It started with something small. Jennifer became unusually interested in our finances. At first, the questions seemed harmless. She asked about investment accounts she had ignored for years. She wanted updated balances on retirement funds. She suddenly cared about property valuations, insurance policies, and business assets. One evening, she sat beside me at the kitchen counter with a notebook in front of her. "I never realized how much paperwork goes into managing everything," she said casually. I nodded and continued reviewing emails on my laptop. "Most people do not until they have to." She smiled and wrote something down. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it stayed with me afterward. Jennifer had never shown interest in these details before, not once in 18 years. Suddenly, she wanted numbers. Not stories, not plans, numbers. 2 weeks later, Daniel called again. We met at his office this time. He handed me another report. The file was thicker than the previous one. "You need to read this carefully," he said. The report outlined additional financial activity connected to Brian Mitchell. More transfers, more communication, more overlap between Jennifer's movements and Brian's schedule. Then I reached the final section. My eyes stopped on a single paragraph. Daniel had uncovered evidence that Jennifer had consulted a divorce attorney nearly 6 months earlier. 6 months. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. At that moment, everything shifted. Up until then, I believed I was uncovering a hidden relationship. What sat in front of me was something different. This was preparation, planning, strategy. While I was trying to understand what was happening inside my marriage, Jennifer had already begun preparing for life after it. I drove home in silence. The mountains stood against the horizon beneath a pale blue sky. Traffic moved normally. People filled gas stations, grocery stores, restaurants. The world continued exactly as it always had. Yet I felt as though I had crossed an invisible line. That evening, Jennifer returned home carrying takeout from a local restaurant. She smiled when she saw me, asked how my day went, told me a funny story about work. I listened carefully. Every word sounded genuine. That was what made it so unsettling. Somewhere between those ordinary conversations and those hidden meetings, two completely different realities were existing at the same time. Later that night, after she went upstairs, I sat alone in my office and made a decision. If Jennifer had already begun building her future, then I needed to start protecting mine. The next morning, I contacted Robert Hayes. Several people had recommended him over the years. Experienced, strategic, calm under pressure. We met in a downtown office overlooking the city. Robert listened without interrupting while I explained everything Daniel had uncovered. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "You have done something most people never do," he said. "You slowed down long enough to gather facts before acting." I stared out the window for a moment. "What happens now?" Robert opened a legal pad and began writing notes. "Now we prepare." There was no dramatic speech, no promises, just 2 words. We prepare. Over the next several months, that became our entire focus. Robert assembled a team that included forensic accountants and financial specialists. Documents were reviewed. Records were preserved. Timelines were created. Every transaction received scrutiny. Every asset was documented. Every detail mattered. What surprised me most was how normal life continued to appear on the surface. Jennifer and I still attended neighborhood gatherings. We still exchanged holiday gifts. We still smiled in family photographs. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, an entirely different story was unfolding. One Saturday afternoon, we attended a barbecue hosted by neighbors a few blocks away. Children played in the yard. Music drifted from outdoor speakers. The smell of grilled burgers filled the air. Jennifer stood laughing with a group of friends while sunlight reflected off her sunglasses. Several people commented on how happy we looked together. I remember forcing a smile and thanking them. Nobody knew that Robert Hayes had called me that morning with another update. Nobody knew that my attorney's office contained boxes filled with records. Nobody knew that every week brought new evidence and greater clarity. Least of all, Jennifer. That was the irony. The more confident she became, the quieter I grew. She interpreted my calmness as ignorance. She mistook patience for weakness. She believed she was managing the situation perfectly. What she could not see was that every move she made was being documented. Every decision was creating a trail. Every assumption was leading her closer to a destination she never expected. And somewhere along the way, the balance of power quietly changed. Jennifer thought she was building a case for the future she wanted. She never realized she was helping build mine. The official move came on a Tuesday morning in late October. The sky was gray, the kind of Colorado morning where the clouds sit low over the mountains and everything feels colder than the temperature suggests. I was halfway through reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant informed me that someone had arrived at the office asking for me personally. A few minutes later, a process server handed me a packet of documents. The moment I saw Jennifer's name at the top, I knew exactly what it was. Divorce papers. Months of preparation had finally reached the surface. I thanked the man, returned to my office, closed the door, and sat quietly for several minutes. No anger, no panic, no shock, just silence. The strange thing was that Jennifer probably expected a completely different reaction. She expected confusion, maybe desperation, perhaps even a confrontation. Instead, I opened the packet and carefully read every page. The requests were ambitious. The house, significant portions of investment accounts, claims regarding future earnings, requests structured in a way that suggested someone believed they held a very strong position. As I turned each page, I could almost hear Robert Hayes's voice reminding me to stay patient. Facts first, emotions later. By noon, copies of the documents were already sitting on Robert's desk. He called me that afternoon. "It starts now," he said calmly. "She has officially committed to a strategy." I leaned back in my chair and looked out the office window. Cars moved through downtown traffic below. People crossed intersections carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Life continued normally while mine entered a completely different chapter. "Anything surprise you?" Robert asked. "No," I replied. "That is what concerns me." He laughed softly. "Good. It means we were prepared." Prepared. That word had become the foundation of everything. While Jennifer believed she was taking control of the situation, Robert and I had spent months building defenses she did not know existed. The following evening, Jennifer arrived home unusually cheerful. She carried a bottle of wine and suggested we order takeout from our favorite Italian restaurant. The performance would have been convincing if I did not already know what had happened that morning. We sat across from each other at the dining room table, discussing ordinary topics. Work, weather, weekend plans. Then finally she placed her glass down and looked directly at me. "You received the paperwork today." It was not a question. I nodded. "I did." She studied my face carefully, waiting, measuring, looking for cracks. "I think this is the right decision," she said. Her tone was controlled, professional, almost rehearsed. "If that is how you feel," I answered. For a brief moment, confusion crossed her face. Not because of what I said, but because of what I did not say. There was no argument. No attempt to change her mind. No emotional appeal. The reaction she expected never arrived. Later that night, after she went upstairs, I sat alone on the patio and watched the porch light illuminate the backyard fence. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. My phone buzzed. A message from Robert. "We are exactly where we need to be." 3 days later, the first settlement proposals arrived. That was when Jennifer revealed how confident she truly was. The requests extended beyond what most reasonable negotiations would consider balanced. It was clear she believed the pressure alone would force concessions. Robert reviewed everything carefully before sliding the documents back across his conference table. "She thinks you are reacting emotionally," he said. "That is why these demands are structured this way." I looked down at the pages. "And if I am not?" Robert smiled. "Then she has a problem." The weeks that followed became a study in contrast. Publicly, Jennifer acted increasingly confident. Mutual friends began hearing carefully crafted versions of events. Casual conversations suddenly included subtle references suggesting she had endured years of disappointment. Nothing dramatic, nothing openly hostile, just enough narrative shaping to influence perception. Robert had warned me this might happen. "People prepare legal cases," he said during one meeting. "They also prepare social cases." Fortunately, facts remain facts regardless of how stories are told. Behind the scenes, our preparation continued. Financial records were analyzed in greater detail. Additional documentation was preserved. Timelines expanded. Every meeting with Robert seemed to reveal another layer Jennifer never expected us to uncover. What fascinated me most was how completely unaware she remained. Each new filing from her attorney carried the same confidence. Each negotiation position assumed weakness on my side. Each move suggested she believed the outcome was becoming more certain. In reality, the opposite was happening. One evening, as autumn gave way to winter, I watched Jennifer standing in the kitchen talking on her phone. She was smiling, relaxed, certain of herself. For a brief second, I wondered what she believed the future would look like once everything was over. Then she glanced in my direction and smiled again, completely unaware that every step she was taking was leading exactly where Robert predicted it would, toward a courtroom where assumptions would finally collide with evidence. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with the kind of cold that settles into concrete and lingers long after sunrise. Frost covered the edges of parked cars outside the courthouse, and clouds drifted low across the Colorado sky. By then, nearly 11 months had passed since the first time I questioned whether something was wrong. 11 months of gathering facts. 11 months of remaining silent. 11 months of preparation. Robert Hayes met me in the courthouse lobby carrying the same black briefcase he always carried. If someone had seen him from a distance, they would have assumed it contained ordinary paperwork. They would have been wrong. Inside that briefcase sat the result of hundreds of hours of investigation, analysis, and preparation. Documents, financial records, timelines, evidence, the kind of information that does not care about opinions. Facts rarely do. How are you feeling? Robert asked as we walked toward the courtroom. I thought about the question for a moment. Months earlier, I might have answered differently. Hurt, betrayed, confused. Now the answer surprised even me. Calm, I said. Robert nodded once. Good. We entered the courtroom and took our seats. The room smelled faintly of paper, polished wood, and old coffee. A few attorneys organized files at nearby tables. Court staff moved quietly through the room. Everything appeared ordinary. Yet beneath the surface, every person there carried a different agenda. Across the room, Jennifer arrived with her attorney. She looked confident, more confident than I had seen her in months. Her posture was straight, her expression composed. She greeted several people warmly before taking her seat. Then she looked in my direction. For a moment our eyes met. She smiled politely, the same smile she had worn at neighborhood gatherings. The same smile she had worn during settlement discussions. The same smile she wore whenever she believed events were unfolding according to plan. Brian Mitchell was not present inside the courtroom that morning, but his influence seemed to linger around everything. Every financial decision, every unexplained transfer, every carefully constructed narrative. Whether Jennifer realized it or not, many of the choices that brought her here connected directly back to him. The hearing itself focused largely on procedural matters. Schedules, timelines, preliminary positions. Nothing dramatic, at least not on the surface. Yet something important happened that day. For the first time, Jennifer's attorney began presenting assumptions as though they were established facts. Assumptions about finances, assumptions about contributions, assumptions about future outcomes. I watched carefully while Robert took notes. He rarely interrupted, rarely reacted. The calmer he appeared, the more dangerous he became. After nearly an hour, the judge asked several questions regarding financial disclosures. Jennifer's attorney answered confidently. Certain records, he explained, would support their position once submitted. The confidence in his voice was unmistakable. They genuinely believed the evidence favored them. Robert remained silent. He simply wrote another note. By the time the hearing concluded, Jennifer appeared pleased. Her attorney spoke with her in the hallway afterward, occasionally gesturing toward documents. They looked satisfied, optimistic, as though the morning had confirmed everything they expected. Robert and I walked toward the parking garage without speaking. Only after we reached his vehicle did he stop. Did you notice it? He asked. Notice what? He adjusted his glasses and looked back toward the courthouse entrance. They are committing to a narrative. I thought about the hearing, the statements, the assumptions, the confidence. Then I understood. Once people commit publicly to a version of events, changing course becomes difficult, especially when evidence points elsewhere. Robert opened his briefcase and removed a folder. This arrived yesterday. I looked down at the label. Financial analysis update. Another report from the forensic accounting team. Another layer of information. Another piece of the puzzle. We reviewed it together at his office later that afternoon. The findings revealed additional discrepancies that had not appeared in earlier reviews. Nothing illegal. Nothing sensational. Just patterns. Transfers that contradicted prior statements. Timelines that raised uncomfortable questions. details that became significant only when viewed together. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer the overall picture became. By sunset, I stood outside Robert's office building watching city lights flicker on across downtown Denver. Traffic flowed steadily through the streets below. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed through the evening air. Robert stepped beside me. "She still thinks this is about negotiations," he said quietly. "What is it about?" I asked. He looked toward the horizon before answering. "It is about evidence." That single sentence stayed with me during the drive home. Evidence. Not opinions. Not stories. Not assumptions. Evidence. Jennifer still believed confidence would carry her through the process. She still believed preparation belonged only to her side. What she could not see was that every hearing, every filing, every statement was narrowing the path ahead. And somewhere beyond that path waited a moment neither she nor her attorney expected. A moment when years of assumptions would finally meet the documents sitting inside Robert Hayes's black briefcase. The final hearing arrived on a bright winter morning nearly a year after the first doubts entered my mind. Sunlight reflected off the courthouse windows, turning the glass into sheets of white light. By 8:30, the hallways were already busy. Attorneys moved between conference rooms carrying folders and legal pads. Court clerks organized schedules behind reception counters. The sound of footsteps echoed across polished floors. Everything felt ordinary. That was the strange part. Life-changing moments rarely announced themselves. They arrived disguised as normal days. Robert Hayes and I sat quietly at our table while people filtered into the courtroom. He reviewed several documents one final time before closing his briefcase. The movement was calm, deliberate. Nothing about him suggested concern. Across the room, Jennifer entered with her attorney. She looked confident, more confident than I had seen her in months. Her posture was perfect, her expression controlled. She carried herself like someone approaching the finish line of a race she believed she had already won. For a brief moment, I found myself studying her face. 18 years of memories still lived there. Holidays, vacations, late-night conversations, dreams we once shared. Yet the woman standing across the room felt strangely distant, as though she belonged to another life entirely. The hearing began shortly after 9. Initial arguments followed the same pattern that had developed throughout the case. Jennifer's attorney presented financial claims with certainty. He referenced assumptions about future earnings, asset distribution, and contributions to the marriage. The presentation was polished, professional, carefully structured. Several times I noticed Jennifer nodding along. Everything appeared to be unfolding exactly as she expected. Then Robert stood. The shift was subtle, almost invisible, yet I felt it immediately. He walked toward the podium carrying a single folder. Not the entire briefcase, just one folder. The judge adjusted several documents while Robert began speaking. His voice remained steady and conversational. No dramatic language, no emotional appeals, just facts. The first documents addressed financial disclosures, dates, transactions, records. On their own, each item seemed small. Together, they created a timeline. Robert moved through them methodically. One document led to another. One date connected to the next. Gradually, the confidence on the opposite side of the room began to change. Jennifer's attorney interrupted several times. Questions became objections. Objections became requests for clarification. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Then Robert introduced the forensic accounting analysis. I watched Jennifer's expression carefully. For the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared. It lasted only a second. Then another document appeared. Then another. Financial transfers. Previously undisclosed movements of money. Records connected through timelines established months earlier. Nothing sensational. Nothing exaggerated. Just evidence. The kind that quietly removes room for interpretation. The judge spent several minutes reviewing one section in particular. During that silence, the entire courtroom seemed to grow smaller. Papers stopped moving. Conversations stopped. Even the sound of typing from the clerk's desk faded into the background. Jennifer looked toward her attorney. He leaned closer and whispered something. Whatever he said did not restore her confidence. Robert continued. Each document supported the next. Each record reinforced a larger pattern. Months of preparation unfolded one page at a time. The remarkable thing was how ordinary it all looked. No raised voices. No dramatic confrontations. Just facts placed in sequence until the picture became impossible to ignore. Around noon, the judge requested a brief recess. People stood and stretched. Attorneys gathered near the hallway. Jennifer remained seated for several moments before finally walking toward the exit. As she passed our table, her expression looked different. Not defeated. Not yet. But uncertain. The certainty that had followed her for months was beginning to disappear. Robert remained seated, calm as ever. He took a sip of coffee and opened another folder. "How much more is left?" I asked quietly. He glanced toward the courtroom doors before answering. "Enough." When proceedings resumed, the atmosphere felt completely different. Confidence had given way to caution. Assumptions had given way to questions. The narrative that once seemed so secure was now being examined through documents neither Jennifer nor her attorney expected to see presented in such detail. And as the afternoon sunlight stretched across the courtroom floor, I realized something important. This was never about catching someone off guard. It was never about revenge. It was about preparation meeting reality. About patience meeting evidence. About the difference between believing you are winning and proving it. And for the first time since this entire process began, it became clear that the outcome Jennifer imagined was slipping farther away with every page the judge turned. The judge returned shortly after 2 in the afternoon. Winter sunlight streamed through the high courtroom windows, stretching long rectangles of light across the polished floor. Everyone stood as proceedings resumed. By then, the atmosphere had changed completely. The confidence that filled the room that morning had faded. In its place sat something quieter. Uncertainty. The judge spent several minutes reviewing notes before addressing both legal teams. Questions followed. Clarifications. References to financial records, disclosures, and timelines that had been examined throughout the day. Robert Hayes answered calmly. Methodically. He never rushed. Never dramatized. He simply pointed back to documents already entered into the record. Facts. Dates. Numbers. Evidence. Across the room, Jennifer sat unusually still. Her attorney occasionally leaned over to whisper updates, but the conversations grew shorter as the afternoon continued. The pattern that had taken nearly a year to uncover now sat organized inside official court records. No assumptions. No speculation. Just information. The kind that speaks for itself. As the hearing moved toward its conclusion, I found myself thinking back to that first hotel receipt. The first strange message. The first moment something felt different. At the time, I believed I was standing at the beginning of a mystery. What I did not understand was that every answer would eventually lead here. To a courtroom. To a winter afternoon. To a moment where preparation mattered more than emotion. The judge finally began outlining the court's findings. Asset division would follow documented contributions and verified financial disclosures. Certain requests presented during the initial filing would not be granted as originally proposed. Several positions advanced during negotiations were adjusted substantially based on the evidence submitted. The language remained formal, professional, yet the meaning was unmistakable. The future Jennifer expected was no longer the future in front of her. I glanced across the room. Her expression remained controlled, but the certainty was gone. For the first time since this process began, she looked like someone confronting a reality she never anticipated. Not because anyone surprised her. Not because anyone tricked her. Because facts proved stronger than assumptions. When the final procedural matters concluded, the judge thanked both parties and adjourned the hearing. Just like that, it was over. No dramatic speeches. No celebration. No grand finale. The room slowly emptied as attorneys gathered their files and court staff prepared for the next case. Robert closed his briefcase and stood. "Well," he said quietly, "that concludes a very long year." I nodded. Strangely, I did not feel victorious. Relief, perhaps. Clarity. A sense of finality. But not victory. Winning implies defeating someone. That was never my goal. My goal was understanding the truth and protecting myself from decisions I did not make. Outside the courthouse, the air felt sharp and clean. The mountains stood against the horizon beneath a pale blue sky. People moved along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups, talking on phones, heading toward ordinary afternoons. Life continued. It always does. Robert shook my hand before heading toward his car. "Take some time," he said. "You have earned that much." Then he disappeared into the parking structure. I stood alone for several moments watching traffic move through the intersection. Eventually, I began walking toward my truck. Halfway there, I heard my name. I turned. Jennifer stood several yards away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the city seemed distant. She looked tired. Not angry. Not hostile. Just tired. You knew for a long time, didn't you? She asked quietly. I considered the question before answering. Long enough. She nodded slowly. Her eyes drifted toward the courthouse behind us. I did not think things would end like this. I looked at the building, then back at her. Neither did I. Another silence followed. 18 years compressed into a few quiet seconds. Finally, she gave a small nod and stepped back. No arguments. No accusations. Nothing left to debate. Some conversations end because people reach agreement. Others end because the facts have already spoken. I watched her walk away before turning toward my truck again. The drive home felt different from every drive that came before it. Not because my life suddenly became perfect. It did not. Not because the past disappeared. It never would. The difference was simpler than that. For the first time in nearly a year, I no longer needed answers. The questions were finished. The uncertainty was gone. That evening I sat alone on the back patio as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The same patio where I once sat wondering how much I did not know. The same backyard where confusion had slowly given way to understanding. The air smelled of pine and cold earth. Lights appeared in neighboring houses one by one. Somewhere nearby, a porch door closed. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. I realized then that the most dangerous opponent is not the loudest person in the room or the most confident one. It is the patient person, the one willing to wait for facts, the one willing to prepare while everyone else assumes the outcome has already been decided. And as darkness settled across the neighborhood, I finally stood, walked inside, and closed the door on a chapter of my life that had taken far too long to end.